Today I am here with my colleagues Leire Minguez and Martino Guber. We all do research and innovation in facade technology and development, and circularity is becoming one of the main drivers when designing future facade solutions. Let's explain how we consider circularity when doing innovation in the building envelope field.
Yeah, so there are many aspects to be considered, but the first step is to understand what is the role of each facade element. Because if we understand why are we using this element, we can ask ourselves if we can optimize it, for example, using another material that can have the similar performance.
Exactly, and even the amount of material that we use in our technologies. Sometimes we see that facade manufacturer oversize a bit the materials, but just because they have used to work in a specific way in a manufacturing process or in purchasing the materials that has standard dimensions.
Yes, or because they are linked to the dimensions of other facade elements. For example, in some timber frame manufacturers, they install timber mullions that are thicker than what is expected for the structural performance, just because they are using an insulation layer that is thicker for the required thermal performance. So at the end, they end up using more timber than needed.
Or the other way around. So a company has a standard mullion dimension and then over dimension the insulation between it.
Right, manufacturing companies do that to achieve an easy, fast, and cheap way of production. However, they should start considering how to minimize the use of materials when possible.
So when designing future solutions, ask yourself about the role of each facade component and make sure you are using the materials in an optimized way.
In other words, we must appreciate the materials we use. Price and velocity are not the only things that matters. We have limited resources in our planet, and transforming them has also an environmental impact.
Yes, of course. We need to understand the value of each materials. I mean, we could say that some materials are precious because they might have an expected life that exceed the single lifetime of a facade. So if we need to use such a materials in a facade element, we must use it in a smart way so that the way you are designing and installing it does not jeopardize the future reuse of it.
However, direct reuse is not always easy to foresee or even possible.
Yeah, indeed. Sometimes we need to post-process the material or even to remanufacture it. To ensure the reusability of the material, we should enable a non-harming post-processing. Imagine that you use a glued insulated material in a shading box made of oriented strand board. So this OSB could be used at the end of their life for other purposes. But the problem is that if we have glue to the insulation material, we cannot reuse this OSB again.
That's why design for assembly and disassembly is so important.
Yeah, by following such mindset, we should substitute, for example, all these glue connections with dry connections that are more easy to disassembly and not harming post-processing.
But this is not only applicable to facade product standalone, as Martino always reminds us.
That is, when you design or develop a facade system, you need to do it with an holistic vision, which means that you always need to keep in mind how you install the product in the building. You can use a design for assembly and disassembly approach, but then if you use its installation, you use tape, expandable foam, for instance, and so on, all the previous effort might be worthless.
In other words, we must apply the circular mindset in all the stages of the facade. Moreover, the use of design assessment methods that integrate circularity indicators could be very useful to compare different solutions.
Another challenge that Martino worked on is on the integration of new materials, and he even developed some new ones aligned with the circular principles.
Yes, for instance, I worked on producing insulation materials coming from waste of the food industry in Trentino Alto Adige region in Italy. We were able to develop new materials with comparable thermal performance compared to the traditional insulation. And then we still need to work on challenging the user mindset. So let's try to change the mindset of the people in order to accept this kind of new product coming from circular approach.
Well, that's part of research and innovation. we need to make many small steps in order to transform current facade industry and to start closing the loop of the facade products. Thank you, Leire and Martino, for sharing your experience on how to design future facades while taking circularity into account.
You're welcome.